we are going to do a pump test. We do lots of pump tests. I like to do pump tests as simple as possible way that I can, which is usually like a discharge, a nozzle right off the back of the truck. Everybody's seen me do this. But we are going to do a pump test to make sure that we meet the expectations of the Femper, which is a good thing. The Femper is a good thing. I bashed on it once upon a time. I don't anymore. It's a good way to keep track of stuff. Do I necessarily agree with the way they do their pump test? Maybe, maybe not. But I think what's key here is that my pump test that I teach everybody to do that's really simple works really well on a BB4. It works pretty well on a Type 3. You can make all of that come together and work. You cannot make them work on the Darley AGE. What we've recently learned about a year ago or so, talking with the BLM Fire Equipment Committee, is that what they're called? Sure. Okay, the boys and boys, yeah, are a great resource. You can call them up and go, hey, my stuff's not, what's up with this? Anyway, good deal. Anyway, so talking to them, the Darley AGE max performance isn't necessarily at max RPM. Using the nozzle, you need to have that known set point for where max performance is. Generally, that's at max RPM. That works with the BB4, etc. Does not work with the AGE. You have to crank it up into maximum RPM. You have to back it off a little bit to get max performance. So it's a little more complicated. It takes a little more time to pump test a AGE pump. Also, you need to have a flow meter. You can't do it with the nozzle, the tip system. So if you don't have a flow meter, you're kind of screwed. You need to find one to use. Yeah. So we wanted to be able to measure our flows at 50 psi, at 100 psi, 150, 200, 250, 300, 350, and 400, and then max pressure, which is shut-off pressure. Those are all the things we want to be able to document in this. So, hold on to that for a moment. So what do we use to do that? Today we're going to use a flow meter. This is a Lake Monitors brand flow meter. Yes, I usually use my other flow meter with the little remote sensor and digital readout. It's super nice. I've tried it. So we have to use something different. This is what they had on hand here. This should work just fine. The other question came up. No, let me come back to that. So if I'm doing a pump test off a flow meter, the process is fairly simple. I fire up the truck and run it up to that max performance curve, right? We already said that that's a little funky in the Darley AGEs. But maybe check that I'm in frame. What I would normally do for this kind of a pump test is I attach my flow meter to my discharge. You could put a hose in there and then you don't have, you know, that whole concept about like put things on Mark III. But this is high quality stuff, not, you know, that cast aluminum off the edge of Mark III. Anyway, we're gonna go direct. And look, we can even read our gauge here. That's good. So when this guy flows, this little black line in the white will move up here to show us what the actual flow is. So normally I would fire this up, crank it up to max RPM, because on most of my pumps, except for this one, that's gonna be my maximum performance. And then I close I would close this valve here to start to crank up my pressure, watching my pressure gauge. So when I get to 50, I read what the flow is on it, right? Super easy, okay? And then I write that down. Then I crank this up a little bit more until it hits 100, and I do the same thing. So doing a pump test with the flow meter is really easy, it's really convenient, and it works pretty well. The problem with the Darley AGE is that max performance is not at max RPM, so it's not a static point in there, and I'm only making one adjustment and reading. I actually have to get this around 50 psi, and then I have to back off my throttle a little bit, bring the RPM down, and watch my flow increase ever so slightly and then I may have to make some adjustments between this and my throttle. So you'll be sitting here watching your pressure gauge, watching your flow meter, and adjusting both here and here until you get maximum flow out of here at the required, requested, desired, is that the right word?
Sure.
Pressure. So the first question was, before we found this, we had this other pitot one. Let me grab it. Okay, so I had this flow meter. This flow meter works just fine. You can do it with this, but it's much more difficult because you have to do a little bit of reverse engineering and calculate it on the fly to get to that max flow. Not as much because there's a big gauge that attaches right here, and I'm looking for highest pressure on this gauge. So if we were doing it with this guy, I'd be looking at high pressure on this gauge at roughly my ideal desired pressure on that gauge. This is a little bit easier. There's no calculations that go into effect later to determine that I got that for sure. But as pressure goes up, discharge volume goes up. That's just a given in the equation. So we could do it with this. I just have never done it with this. And I was thinking I had to reverse engineer it. Actually don't. It could be done, and maybe we'll do one with this later just to
check our results or something.
Check our results, see if we come up with anything different. Anyway, for now we're just gonna use the flow meter. That's our game plan. And stick that back in. So we'll fire it up, crank it up. The first or the last reading on the chart is max pressure, I think it is, or shut off pressure is what I call it. It says flowing 0 GPM. So we'll crank it up to max RPM. That's going to be our max pressure. We'll write that down, and then we will start flowing water, and we'll start doing those adjustments where we back off our throttle a little bit. We neck this down until we get about 50 PSI up there, looking for highest flow possible. Cool?
Yeah, sounds great.
Let's do it. Also running water into the tank as we go. It's just trickling in there because we're going to use a bunch of water. And yeah, technically an FPA pump test, you do it off of the raft, but for our purposes, we're fine with this. Let's do this. So, where's your sheet? There it is. I'll take notes. First thing I'm going to go for is my max pressure at 0 gallons per minute flow, which is just shut off pressure. Alright, the gauge jumped. Leave that off. Leave it override it. We're gonna
get down to 0.
Yeah, big giant flows. You know, we're here monitoring it. We're good. Yeah.
So we want to rev this up?
We do, but just give her 2 turns and let it warm up a little bit. Okay, bypass is open. For like a pump test that I want to really be accurate in, I'd probably close it, but at the same time it's a pretty small discharge, so I'm not that worried about it. Temper's pretty formal, so when we get up there, we'll go ahead and close it. Yeah. But for warm up, we want to circulate water while we're warming up. All right, we're warmed up. Go ahead and crank that thing up to give me max pressure. I'm watching the gauge right here for max pressure. For the most part, this is mechanically governed. You know, I'm watching my tack, which I may or may not trust, but it's really about how high I can go up. It'll go to 3, so get there. Won't turn anymore. We're at 380. 405. Okay. Open that till I get about 50 psi. Oh, sorry. We'll go backwards. 350 psi. Right here. Open it up, blow it. Right there. Okay. Alright, now I am adjusting the throttle and the discharge, looking for max flow at 350. Okay. So now we drop her down to 300. Hit the valve, drop it down. Yeah.
Do we want to make note of the RPM of the motor at these points?
So I believe it's in there to make note somewhere. So the question is, do you make note of the RPM? And the idea is, yeah, it's not a bad idea, right? But, okay, so we're in pause mode, right? So the problem is that most of these gauges aren't actually right. But it does tell you some information. It doesn't correlate to performance directly, other than if you're having some trouble somewhere, you might be able to tie this back and say, oh, wait a minute, something's not measuring correctly. Yeah, it doesn't hurt. Yeah, do it if you can. If not, the core piece you have to get is the flow at pressure. Okay, so now we just did 300 and we were 42. Right? And it's funky. You gotta back it off a little bit and adjust this guy. This pump is, high crank RPM. It's pretty close to its flow. There are a couple of them out here where it's actually backed off quite a bit to get the flow up. So be aware of that. This one's much closer to that crank all up type of thing than some of them are. Yeah. Okay. So what, 250 is our next one?
Yeah, 250.
All right. I'll do this one and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay.
Okay? So back up in RPM.
Not there. Not there.
How do we lose our time? Nothing else is open, that means we have the vacuum clean. No, I got it. That's right. So 55. Okay, you want to do it? Sure. All right.
Okay, so we're going for 200 psi.
Yep. We're backed off about a quarter to half a turn here, and it feels like that's in the sweet spot for RPM. It's a feel thing, kind of. So mostly you're dealing with this. Back that off to 200, or open it up so you get to 200, right? And then take a look at this. Then you adjust your RPM a little bit, see if it moves.
Copy.
Okay, great. So we open the valve until we hit 200. We're blowing more water. Okay, 200, close enough. And we're looking at the flow meter, which is between 60 and 90. And he's going to adjust the RPM and see if he can get the flow to come up. And it doesn't look like it's doing anything. Now it seems like it's just barely dropping down. So back in his sweet spot, 90 minus 2 marks, 1280. Each mark is 12. I know it's weird. Each mark is 12. Well, yeah.
So we're like, we're like an 84.
Yeah. Each mark is 6.
Each mark is 12. 78.
78 is what I had. Good. 78. Okay, open it, back it off to 150. That's good, that's 150. Like 108, and then he adjusts the RPM to see if you can get it to go up or down, and sometimes to get the volume up you have to turn it down.
we're looking at.
Point there is, so yeah, we lost our prime because at 108 gallons a minute, trickling water into the tank wasn't going fast enough. We got that measurement and we ran out of water, basically. So we'll shut her down and top the tank back off, and we'll go back into this test in just a second, and we'll flow more water into that tank while we do it. Okay, we're full of water again. Fire that thing back up, make sure she's primed and running. And we'll have to get it back up in that higher RPM, but we're looking at 100 PSI, so.
Breaking this back up to max RPM for flowing water.
Max RPM minus about a half turn, yeah.
To 100 PSI.
Yep. Okay. Now open it more so you hit about 50. That's good. Alright, free flow, now start from now. Go.
All we got?
All you got, open all the way. That's it. That's it. Yeah. Okay. Take a thumbs up. Yeah, we got about 122, 126.
Nowhere near.
Okay, now we can close that. Okay, so the last pieces there were free flow at max RPM. That's where we cranked it all the way up as fast as it'll turn, and we measured what it would flow at, right? And then open the valve all the way. We measured that max flow, unrestricted, and we still got 114. We had 114 at 100 PSI. We had 114 at 50 PSI. That's not bad. That's not a bad thing. That's actually fairly normal. That's about the top end of the performance curve today. The interesting thing, which demonstrates the point of this pump type, is that best flow at free flow, that's where we left it flowing unrestricted and we RPM down slowly. It actually, you saw how it came up, we actually had 126 at much lower RPMs. So on these Darley AGEs, or at least this one specifically, you can get more volume when you're under a heavy volume load. It actually performs better at a slightly lower RPM. I don't know why it does it. It's just an engineering thing. It's the way it works. You can probably shut that off now. And that's the process. So to recap, without the motor running, to give us some, with a little bit less noise, I start at the bottom of my chart because I crank it up as high as I can get my pressure to go, and I get my max pressure at 0 gallons per minute. That's shut-off pressure, and we got 405. And then we took a measurement at 400, and we couldn't really get anything at 400 because that's about our max shut-off pressure. So our first measurement was at 350. We got 20 gallons a minute, and you get your RPM up there, and that first one, it's kind of where you find your first sweet spot. But open your valve, bring it down to about 350, and then see if you can crank it up a little bit and get any better flow, or crank it down a little bit and get better flow. And that's the trick. When you crank it up and down, it also changes your pressure, so you have to kind of adjust. That's why you're doing the two-hand thing. But mostly after the second or third measurement, you're pretty close to the sweet spot, and it's a minimal amount. So you open it a little bit more to drop your pressure because you're flowing more water. When you drop it down to 200 or 250 or whatever you're looking at, you just have to back it off a little bit and see if your flow comes up. Crank it up a little bit and see if your flow comes up. Does it adjust what's on here? A little bit. If you noticed, not that much, because we're moving pretty high volumes. So, just looking at that chart, I'd say you are totally within tolerance for performance. Minimum standard is 50 gallons a minute at 100 PSI, and you were at 114 gallons a minute at 100 PSI. So you're totally a pass on that from an ICS standpoint. And just knowing this pump and having done 1.5 million pump tests, you're pretty damn close all the way through to what I needed to see. So, yay, we win. If you wanted to take your pump test a step farther, the other thing I really like to do is a dry vacuum test to see if you can hold a dry vacuum. I know I can see that you have some vacuum leaks. I can see water dripping from places it probably shouldn't. So I know that there's some issues in here, but that's okay. It'd be interesting to know if you could pass a dry vacuum test. That's drain all the water out, every bit of it, and pull your primer, pull 22 inches of vacuum, and it should hold that for 5 minutes. You can lose 10 inches in 5 minutes and still pass. But really, if I'm losing anything, I know I have vacuum leaks, so I probably ought to try to fix it.
Do you have to drain the tank, or can you just...
No, you can leave the tank full. You just have to drain the plumbing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool?
Cool.
Sweet.
Made a lot more sense when I saw that max flow and you dropped it.
Yeah.
Drop the RPMs way down and moving way more water.
Yeah.